Welcome into Sports Around the Bar, your favorite sports talk show, I'm sure. As always, I am Jakey Bartender, and I'm joined over the phone today by Hannah, our college football expert. Hannah, good to talk to you. A little bit of a slow week. Is there anything you're looking forward to here? I mean, we had a lot of action last week, a lot of upsets, a lot of big news. This week, I think we're going to be kind of scrounging for more stuff to watch. What about this week has got you most excited, Hannah?
I think there's actually pretty good matchups. I think one of them tomorrow is going to be producing West Virginia at Baylor. This game always has a lot of
Today by Hannah.
Baylor right now, undefeated, putting on a great show so far, 7-0. That's going to be a big game to watch tomorrow. But in the SEC, you have one really big matchup, and that's going to be Georgia and Florida. Because right now, the Gators are at 7-1, the Bulldogs are at 6-1. This is really going to be the game for the East, and this is going to be a big game to watch, a big showdown. And then a couple other games you don't want to miss out. SMU and Memphis, both top 25 showdowns. And then honestly, Utah at Washington's one that I have circled that you must watch in the Pac-12. But are they as fascinating as previous weeks, especially last week? No. But let's be honest. All these games are leading up till next week. But there's definitely some Week 10 action that you don't want to miss out on.
Absolutely. If I could call it something, I'd say with the teams are moving into their fall break, you're seeing a lot of buys, especially at the top. But there are some interesting games coming up. I'm with you. The headline is definitely Georgia and Florida. It's almost like this is the battle for the East. The winner gets to go on and try to win the SEC championship and sneak their way back into the playoff. The loser, maybe this is it. Maybe this is the end of the road for those teams.
Exactly. So it's going to be a big showdown on the left, and I think, honestly, this just kind of shows how the SEC East has been this year, because coming into it, everyone thought it was going to be Georgia, and everyone else in Florida has shown they're capable of beating good teams, especially like Auburn. So this is going to be an interesting showdown, and I think that this is probably one of my favorite games so far that I've seen out of the East.
But before we get into that, why don't we talk about the NCAA now ruling that players are going to have the ability to profit off their likenesses. We've talked about it before. California kind of kickstarted all of this when they started talking about should players be allowed to earn money on their own likenesses. This isn't, just to clarify, the schools paying the players. This is the players being able to go out and earn money doing commercials and doing endorsement deals and using their likeness and using their names to try to make money off the field on their own. Hannah, I'm going to kick it to you first. Do you like the idea that the NCAA has kind of reversed its field now that some of these state governments are saying that, yes, the players should be allowed to make money on their own?
I think we've talked about this before. I think that we've kind of seen this happening for a while. And I think this is something that has just happened over the last couple of years, really. Even I think you look at some of the names like Tim Tebow, maybe even Johnny Manziel, kind of stirred up the conversation on this when they were playing. And we knew that if you were a Florida fan and you had number 15 on, that was because of Tebow. Same thing with Johnny Manziel. If you're an Aggies fan, you're wearing Johnny Manziel's jersey, with or without his last name on it, you knew who that jersey was. And I think that's kind of what we're seeing come to a head, is having these decisions made. So, of course, now the NCAA is allowing athletes to profit from their name, image, and likeness in a major shift. So is this a win? Yes and no. I think it's going to take a while. I think this is going to be something that we're going to see a smooth sailing with. I think they're going to kind of have to work some kinks out over time. But I think this, in the long run of the sport, was probably the best decision for the longevity of college football and college sports in general.
And Scott, good to see you, man. He says, welcome to sponsored teams. Do you think that's the first step here? Because honestly, that was one of the NCAA's major arguing points against this, Scott, was if the players can go out and get sponsorships, that's going to take money away from the schools and the programs where they had no choice but to sponsor the school and the program in the past. Now, these players can go out. They may say, I don't want to sponsor LSU. I don't want to be the title sponsor of the stadium. Instead, I'd rather just pay whoever their quarterback is and have him be in my commercials and try to generate revenue for my company like that. So does this mean we now are going to have sponsored schools and it'll be Alabama wearing, maybe an Under Armour badge in the corner, or God forbid they turn into soccer and that's, the advertisement's the main part of the jersey, and then you get like a little Alabama up in the corner. Do you see that happening here potentially with this kind of move from the NCAA?
I think this is one of the things that we'll see happen over time. That's kind of what I'm talking about with working out the kinks, because, that was something we talked about before on the show, was what happens if, this continues to play out. Is it going to take away its money from the university? And in that situation, then yes, it would. I'll give you an example. Tuscaloosa Toyota sponsors Alabama athletics. So if we were to, if Tuscaloosa Toyota was to say, you know what, instead of sponsoring Alabama as a whole, let's just sponsor Tua Tagovailoa. then, of course, universities losing out on money that they were indeed at one point profiting from. So I think there's going to be probably some stipulations. Whether or not I don't think it's going to be sponsors as much as it is, for example, University of Alabama selling uniforms with Tua's name and Judy's name and, Devontae Smith's name. When they're selling those jerseys with those names of those athletes on the back of the jersey, I think that's where we're going to see them profiting from. I don't think we're going to have a discussion where Tua Tagovailoa is going to go meet with a local barber shop and say, hey, because are they going to sponsor them? Maybe. But I think even legally, with having funds, like even as a podcast, so if we were to go out and get money, there's legal ways about going to do that with taxing and revenue. And so that's going to be too complicated for athletes. So I think we're going to see more about the university, and it's going to have to be fair, but how they are selling uniforms, how they're doing all the gear, because that's really where the athletes are wanting the money, is saying, hey, there's 10,000 kids running around in Tuscaloosa with my name on the back of their uniform, and I'm not getting paid a dime for it.
Sure, absolutely. I believe that the apparel is going to be a huge part of it, but my counter argument to that would be, that Tuscaloosa Toyota might decide that sponsoring Tua Tagovailoa instead of sponsoring the entire school of Alabama is more profitable. That's on the school to go out to their sponsor and say, here's what you're getting when you sponsor us. We need to get more competitive. We need to keep people striving to keep this free market open. Right now, it's a closed market. You can either sponsor the school or you can sponsor nobody, so these sponsors have nowhere to go. I think opening up the free market helps things. It will help these sponsors get better deals. But right now it's basically my way or the highway when you look at college football or college basketball or any kind of college sports. It's either you sponsor the team or you're not involved with us at all. This will give sponsors some ability to make choices. This will also give players some ability to make money on the side too. Again, Scott says it's going to lead to 4- and 5-star players getting a sweet deal to play there, but tell me that doesn't already happen under the table. Like, we all know it happens. It's the dirty secret in college. If you have any talent at all, a lot of boosters, a lot of stuff goes under the table. A lot of money gets funneled to these guys under the table. I'm all in favor of bringing this stuff to the light, because all of a sudden, if these guys have a way to go and make money on their own, they may not need to take that under the table deal. They could just instead say, I'll go to Alabama, or I'll go to Clemson, or I'll go to Cal, or any of these other programs, because I think that's where I can profit from being at. And that will also diversify, in my opinion, a little bit more of the talent. If you have that much talent, instead of going and sitting behind somebody who's that good, you might decide to go try to lead a lesser program. And I think that's going to raise all boats in college football.
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens, just because, like I said, this is going to take an effect to Title IX. And I think that's something that people are kind of forgetting. When you have Title IX, which is a huge effect into the NCAA and recruiting, and why football players, you look at even the history of college football and the player number and why that's changed, that's because of Title IX and having fair opportunity for women and men. And so if this comes into effect, it's going to also come in effect with women's programs. So how are they making money? How are they getting paid? And so I think it's going to be a very slow transition. From people I've talked to the last couple of days about this, it's going to be something we'll see in the next couple of years. It's not going to be something that's starting, in November, and it's all going to be in effect. It's kind of like targeting rule. That's kind of what I have been talking about. It is targeting something that we've been talking about for the last couple of years, but every year there's more updates. There's kind of a lesser, it's less broad on whether calling targeting or not, right? It used to be leading
right.
Your head. Now it's the crown of your helmet. Now it's where you hit the athlete. Now they're all coming out with a rule on hitting the quarterbacks. And so that is what I think is going to happen with this rule. We're going to see over time it play out. And I think over time it's going to change in maybe how we think. So I don't think right off the bat these athletes are going to start making money. I think this is the conversation that we have several parties who are willing to talk about and willing to agree on. And then from there, it's going to kind of be finalized. So, we would be fools to think it doesn't happen under the table. There's a reason why SMU got the death penalty when they did. That's just the front of many issues that have been happening for a while.
And even more recently, guys like Reggie Bush, guys like Cam Newton, all these rumors have surfaced, and it's been after they've gotten out of school. I think, when it was Reggie Bush, they talked about revoking the Heisman from him and everything else, and to me, it all happens. Everybody knows it happens from all college sports. Or at least the popular ones. When you want to talk about, college basketball, college football, maybe even something like college baseball, there's a little bit of that. There's a reason the good programs stay good, and there's a reason that a lot of great players want to flock there. Yes, on the field talent matters. Yes, players want to win. But when you're talking about a lot of these guys coming from nothing, sometimes a guy saying, hey, I'll slip you 50 grand under the table to play here for the next 4 years is enough incentive to get them to go to a certain school or otherwise. And there's a reason the good programs stay good and the bad ones stay bad. Everybody cheats. Everybody breaks these rules. The question is, who's getting away with more? And like you said, SMU, they got the kiss of death because they decided they wanted to go too far and kind of push the envelope. But we all know everybody does it. It's the dirty laundry of college football or college sports in general. I think this kind of deal might negate a lot of that. It might make, even though that won't ever go away entirely, it might make it to the point where it has less of an impact on the game. And yes, Ken, I am really drinking this beer. There's just a little bit left. Keep track. I'll keep you updated when I switch over to the next one.
And I think something else we're going to see, and this is something they've been talking about, is obviously with scholarships. So some of them have been saying, if college athletes are going to make money, their scholarships should be treated like income. So, he said one of the guys in this whole discussion was saying that he plans to introduce legislation that taxes scholarships for college athletes who choose to cash in. So, I think that's what is going to be important, too, for the athletes to know is, it's gonna be at a cost. So are you gonna make money? Yeah, but at the same time, it's gonna cost you a little bit to be able to make money. And I think we're gonna see some of these athletes buy into that, especially if you're like the star quarterback or the star running back at a program like Alabama, who easily their names all over uniforms. If you're Mac Jones, you're probably not saying, hey, this is kind of worth it for me because no one's really wearing my number. But if you're Tua Tagovailoa or Jerry Jeudy or Devontae Smith, you're like, you know what? This actually is probably profitable for me. And this honestly is going to take an effect through how they make in the NFL because it's going to teach them, I think it should teach them at a younger age how to handle money, how to handle pressure, how to handle fame. And I think if there's an opportunity for them to learn this at a younger age before they move on to the next level, it could actually be beneficial for them down the road. Because how many athletes do we see, burn out their money before they burn out their bodies, right? I mean,
happens all the time.
Say that again?
So it happens all the time. Sorry, I was agreeing with you.
Yeah.
Keep going.
And so Trey Richardson's one of the biggest examples I know because I know him. And we have conversations about, dude, what happened? And he was like, when you make money and you become a millionaire, a family you didn't even know was contacting you saying, hey, you owe me this. Hey, I need this. Hey, I need this. And so I guess buy into that and feed their need. And before you know it, you're out of money. So if there's a way for these college kids to make less mistakes and higher levels of fame and ability, then no doubt in my mind this is going to be good. But I think it's just going to take time, and we don't have all the answers. We don't have all of the expectations of what this is going to look like. And so I think that's going to be one of the biggest things we continue to note is we don't know everything yet, and that's just going to have to be okay.
And I agree with you. Now, Scott says the school should pay the players, but set a limit so there are no bidding wars. And then he goes on to say every school could afford a couple $1,000 per student, not 100,000. He said just regular 1,000. The money is determined on the player. I agree with you. They could go that route, but my whole point is, regardless of whether the schools are paying them or not, it should never be a situation where you tell somebody they can't go and make money on their own. And that's what the NCAA has said. I understand. There's two different issues here. When we're talking about the school selling gear with your name and your number on the back of it, even though they'd argue that the number is theirs, whatever. It's the number that people associate with you. That definitely has Title IX implications. But what doesn't have Title IX implications is you going out and making money on the side doing something that you want to do. The school should have no right to regulate that. Absolutely not. They should not be able to tell you can't go and sign up with Uber in the area and say, hey, Tua Tagovailoa likes Ubering with us. You should too. The school should not be able to say that you can't go and engage in business with somebody else that has nothing to do with the school. And that's the way things are right now. I like them loosening the rule from that standpoint. And again, there are Title IX implications when it comes to the gear being sold because you're going to have more football jerseys sold than college baseball jerseys, than softball, than rowing, than take your pick. The lacrosse team isn't selling a ton of jerseys. But what you need to do is find the balance here from two different angles. And the first is just turn them loose. Whenever they want to go make money on the side on their own, they need to be able to do that. No regulation on that. The school should not even have its hands in it. Yes, does it bring up tax implications? Yes, is it going to be a lot of money to these kids? Yes, it will. But it's America, right? They're old enough to go sign up for a war and go get shot at. They're old enough to make money on their own however they can. I think we need to find the right balance when it comes to, every issue here. It's not just a blanket, they should get paid, they should not get paid. I think we need to fragment this argument or this conversation and start talking about all the different kind of angles to this, because there are a lot of them.
No, I agree 100%. And so, it's going to be interesting to see what happens over time to kind of see, what this exactly looks like. But right now, in my opinion, I think this is just an idea. I think this is just a conversation that you have the NCAA and different lawyers and even, of course, some big names talking about this. And so I think this is just a conversation that's going to take a while to kind of get negotiated, kind of get agreed upon, because when you have different levels, not just NCAA, but you have, state laws and all this in effect too. It's going to change per state, with taxes and stuff. So I think it's just gonna take a little bit of while. It's gonna take a while, but at least the conversation being had, and I think that's enough for these athletes to feel like it's worth it, for them to feel like maybe over time they'll get paid.
Scott also goes on to say, why don't the two big leagues, as in the NBA and the NFL, stop the age requirements and let these players play? Jacob, good to see you. Especially if you're the NFL. You want polished, refined players coming into the league because your selling point is we have the best football in the world. And if you watch the difference between college and pro football, there's a reason they want these guys to go and get 3 and 4 years worth of training, worth of extra strength training, worth of technical training, playing the game. They want to have the most refined product they can. So they want to have that college system to kind of build up younger players for them. As for the NBA, that was a new rule pretty much after LeBron James came in, that they said you had to play X number of years in college. Now it's down to 1. Do I agree with it? Not exactly. If it was my league, I would, especially in the NBA where it's not as physical of a game and you don't run as big of a risk of getting hurt because you're going up against bigger guys, I would say it's okay to play at 18. But pro basketball also has the right to decide that. You can say in any other job that I want to have somebody to have a college degree to have this job. That's essentially what they're saying. They want someone to go and have some training before they move into the NBA. Do I agree with it? Again, if it's me and I'm the NBA, we saw LeBron come in and dominate at 18. Why shouldn't everyone else get a chance to do that? If it's the NFL, do I want someone Trevor Lawrence's size in there taking hits from 330-pound men who can run faster than I can? No, I don't. I want him to get the extra time in the weight room. I want him to get the extra time learning the game and how to protect himself, and then have him come out as a 22 or 23-year-old where he's more physically able to compete in as physical of a sport as football is.
Yeah, and I think another thing you're seeing is the reason for that. And you kind of hit that a little bit earlier, but, people don't understand why. And it's definitely the physicality. When you're let's say you're going straight out of high school, a 17-year-old boy going to face a 32, 33-year-old man, it's going to be a lot different playing than in basketball.
Absolutely.
It's going to be interesting to see what happens if a 17-year-old goes and faces a guy like LeBron James or, even in the past, a Kobe Bryant. But it's not the same physicality than it is in football. And also it has to do even more so with education. And I think that's something that a lot of these coaches are really pushing, and that's why Nick Saban, he says this. If you are one of my athletes and you're wanting to enter the draft, if you're for sure not going to be a first or second round pick, it's not worth it for you money-wise. He said the kids want to go play and make money, but they don't realize if they stay one more year, they may up their draft, and they may end up getting, several $100,000 more a year in their contract by waiting one more year playing in college. Now, of course, you're at injury, but at the same time, it's about elevating yourself and kind of getting exposure. And so I think, one of the ones we talked about, I believe it was in the early 90s, and it was, let me think of his name, Maurice Claret, I think, in the 90s. He was one of the only one that challenged it out of high school. That he hadn't been, he'd been out of high school for less than 3 years, and obviously didn't get drafted, but he kind of brought up the conversation of why do we have to wait until a junior in college. But I think there's so much more than baseball. Basketball, it's just hard to kind of compare the two, especially with the physicality of the game in the professional level. Absolutely.
Damon says he's going back to school to play and make those big bucks. You better hit the gym, buddy, because, again, you get in there, some of those 17-year-olds and 18-year-olds moving into college, they're not little. It's not like 30 years ago where average-sized people were playing the game. Pretty much everybody now is a super athlete already going into college. And despite that, they're still not ready to go and play against these, like you said, 31, 32-year-olds that have been in their gym for 15 years of their life, probably longer than some of these guys have been alive. They're not ready from a physical standpoint to go into that. But so good luck to you, man. All I can say is hit the gym if you're going back to college. Jacob says the longer they're in college, the more experience they get. I agree with you on the most point, but there is a time to come out. There definitely is. And the best example of that is Jake Locker. When he was a junior, everyone talked about him being the first overall pick. They're like, look how great this kid is. He's amazing. Goes back for his senior year, struggles, drops down to, 7, 8, 9. The Titans took him, and he wound up flaming out in college. He left money on the table as well by not coming out. It's all about when it makes sense for you. And going back to what you're talking about with Nick Saban, Hannah, Deontay Thompson's a great example of that. He was a fifth-round safety. He dropped massively in the draft, but sometimes you just have to go out and bet on yourself because nobody ever knows where you're going, reasonably. Once you're outside the top 10, most people don't know if you're going to be a first-round pick. They don't know if you're going to be a fifth-round pick. We were talking about, I can't think of his name, Hakeem Butler, being a first-round pick wide receiver, and he drops all the way to the fourth or fifth round, and Arizona drafts him. Nobody knows, and that's always the thing. It's a lot of 2020 hindsight of, he should have stayed in college because maybe he would have been a higher pick. But at the end of the day, sometimes you just got to throw the dice. Sometimes you can say, I've had as great of a college career as I can have. I don't want to risk myself and go out there and run the risk of getting hurt and not being able to be drafted. I just need to find a way to get drafted and go and make a lot of money. Even if you're a fifth round, sixth round, seventh round pick, if you sign with the team and you find your way out there, you're making more money than the average American, hands down. So I don't necessarily know that it's cut and dried. There are times the guys should stay for the extra year, but more often than not, I think if you get to that junior year, if you feel like you've had a good career in college, it's time to move on.
No, I agree 100%. And I think, a guy that we can talk about is Kerryon Johnson, of course, Auburn running back who, left his junior year. If he would have come back his senior year, we know 100% that more than likely he was going to be injured. That was just the way of the game that Gus Malzahn's been playing. Of course, we could talk about Joey Gatewood, of course, officially leaving the Auburn program. But, Kerryon Johnson knew that if he came back, was there a chance they'd win the national title? Yes. But he also knew that his best interest was leaving so he wouldn't get hurt, so he wouldn't be out because Cameron Petway had been injured that year in the previous year, so he knew based on the history. So I think that was a smart decision. You have some guys who don't stay long enough. And I'm talking about some of the Alabama secondary defensive guys who went later on in the draft that, if they would have come back this year, I think they would have probably been a first, second, maybe third round pick. And so it's just something that you have to weigh your options, and hindsight's always 20/20. So if I was to be an athlete, let's say I'm a junior, and let's say I'm a cornerback, right? Not a quarterback, cornerback. Let's just stick with defense. And, they're saying, she's probably going to be a third-round pick. I have to think, is it going to be worth it for me to come back my senior year? At this point, if I've already won 2 national championships, probably not, right? So it's hard, especially when you're a program like Alabama, to know because so many of these guys have won national championships and at one of their 3 years while being under Nick Saban. So in their mind, they're like, we've already kind of hit the best. Let's just move on to the next level. And at some point, we know that these guys were only in it to make it to the NFL. So you can't kind of discredit them for wanting to move on. But I think they have to be smart and realize, do I have more to give? Is it going to move stuff? I was talking about O.J. Howard's a great example. And I think this is one reason why the Reese Senior Bowl has been so important for these younger guys, maybe that weren't getting a lot of exposure, like O.J. Howard, who went into the Reese Senior Bowl as a third, fourth round pick, ended up being a high pick because of what the Reese Senior Bowl did for him in exposure and showing his talent, because obviously Alabama did not utilize the tight end well. So you can argue both sides, but I think over the history of time, when you stay all 3 years as a college football player, it ends up paying off way better for you than if you were a freshman or junior. Because let's be honest, this Nick Saban's just now using true freshman quarterbacks and true freshman positions. 5-10 years ago, he was using juniors and seniors, so they didn't even have a chance to go leave for the draft of their junior year.
Frank, good to see you, man. He says, Hannah, Jake, good evening, beautiful people. Good evening to you beautiful man. We'll move on and talk about the action from last week because we had a lot going on. I appreciate the conversation. It's always fun when we're talking about things changing in college football and in perspectives because I can go on about this all day. We can argue about it forever. Should you stay? Should you go? Should they make money? Should they not? We can argue about that all day, day and night. Hannah, we'll move on to the action from last week. I think it starts with Notre Dame, right?
Yeah.
Is that the end of Notre Dame's hopes for this season? Is there any way they claw their way back in? Because I think now we're at that fatal point of the year where any loss might be good enough to put you to bed.
Yeah, I think so. I think considering it was to Michigan, a team who, had been struggling. Now, if it would have been a loss to Penn State or a loss to Ohio State, then yeah, I think it was a little bit more grace. But we can't be shocked. I mean, let's just be honest. They struggled. I mean, they lost to Georgia 3 weeks prior to that. They struggled against USC the week before. They only won by 3 points. And so I wasn't shocked they lost to Michigan. And there's no one else really on their schedule that I look and like, oh, that's a hard game. I told you last week, if they lost this game, they're out. That was their last ranked opponent within the top 25 they had to beat. And let's just look at their schedule. Okay, it's easy to say. Out of all the ranked teams they played, which were 2, they lost to both of them. So I think that says a lot about Notre Dame and their inability to win big games. I mean, losing to Georgia and Michigan in the same year, that's not buying you out. So, yes, I think they're officially out. I think even if they went out, there's no way they're climbing themselves back into the college football playoff.
And I think even more than that, 45-14 is the worst part of it. Again, if this was 17-14 or 45-42, we'd be talking about, man, one break, one thing goes Notre Dame's way, we have a different result. That's not the case when you get blown out by Michigan, who's struggled against ranked opponents themselves. I think it does show that this Notre Dame team is not as good as it was last year. Losing guys like Jerry Tillery has hurt this team. They're not in a state where they need to be in the college football playoff. They just aren't. They are now a team that's on the bubble on the outside looking in, that even going into next year, they're going to have to play a significant schedule for us to even consider them, in my opinion. Matthew says, Jake on a solo mission. That's okay. Drew and him are getting ready for Sunday. That's actually not true, Matthew. I do have Hannah on the phone with me, but Drew had to take today off because he had to go and burn some Vikings jerseys. Going back to this Notre Dame game, just to round it out here, we talk about Jim Harbaugh a lot in the show because he is definitely the biggest name, the highest paid coach that's on the bubble and has been at Michigan for long enough that you can say maybe they deserve better. Maybe they deserve someone else leading them at the helm to get better results than they've had. Does this change your opinion? A 45-14 win over a highly ranked opponent. Does it change your opinion at all? Or is this just a game that Michigan, when you have the third highest paid coach, needs to win every year?
I think I'll keep what I've said before. I think Jim Harbaugh's on a warm seat. I don't think he's one of the coaches on the hot seat. I think he's done enough this year to, at this point in the schedule, to kind of secure his job for another year. No, I think it's a game that historically they want to win, but I think this game kind of sealed the deal for Michigan fans kind of on the bubble about Jim Harbaugh. I'll be honest with you. I've had numerous conversations the last couple of weeks with Michigan fans, including this past Saturday, some who are involved with boosters and all that. And from what I know, they're happy. If there's one game that they really wish they wouldn't have lost, that's obviously going to be Wisconsin on the road, because you take away the Wisconsin loss, then you're looking at a loss to Penn State, which is not so bad, considering it's only a 7-point loss on the road. So
to the fifth rated team in the nation, too. Let's clarify.
Wisconsin loss. I mean, you're looking at a Michigan team who's probably more than likely going to be a top 10 team at this point if they would have lost to Wisconsin. If they'd have lost to Penn State, they would have only moved down to probably 9 or 10. You saw of course, Oklahoma we'll talk about. You saw how far they dropped.
Right.
But I mean, Michigan has to win out. I think that there's a good chance that we're going to be really surprised what happens with Michigan hosting Ohio State this year for their final game of the year. Michigan's done pretty well at home. You can't be upset with the fact that they've struggled on the road. Of course, both losses were on the road, but they're doing good at home, and I think that's all Michigan has to do. So if Michigan can win out, out of their next 5 games, 3 of them are at home. That's in Michigan's favor. So it's going to make this Michigan-Ohio State game so much more feisty, because if Michigan wins out for the rest of the game, we're going to look at a top 10 Michigan team. And then you're looking at a team like Ohio State, so it may be a 3-4 versus 10. If Michigan beats Ohio State, we're looking at Michigan possibly being a team that we're forgetting about for the playoff contention conversation. And so that one inspires me. That one intrigues me a lot, because I think this Michigan-Ohio State match is going to be a lot more intense than we thought was going to be earlier this year.
And Matthew says he's excited for this Sunday, hopefully, and he's talking about the Vikings versus Chiefs. Hopefully it's going to be a good game. I'm with you, Matthew. And more than that, I hope that they rest Patrick Mahomes, not just from a selfish standpoint that I don't want him to play I don't want to play him the next week when my Titans match up with the Chiefs, but let me say this about that game, and I've said this before. There's no reason when you're as good as the Chiefs are and your division's as bad as the AFC West is that they need to rush Mahomes back. I think they're going to make a mistake, push him back out on the field too early, and I just hope nothing happens to him, because when you look at up-and-comers in this league, you got guys like Deshaun Watson. People have talked about, I almost said Johnny Manziel, but Baker Mayfield up in Cleveland. It's really Patrick Mahomes' league right now. He is the youngest and brightest star out there for the Chiefs. I don't think there's any reason you need to rush him back when nothing's at risk. You're going to make the playoffs. You're probably still going to have a home field advantage. I hope they rest him against the Vikings. I hope they rest him against the Titans. I hope they rest him as long as he needs to get him back 100% healthy before they put him at risk. Sunday's game should be good as well. Going back to Jacob's comment, he says, I don't think Michigan's defense is as good as Ohio State's. I'm kind of with you, man. I know, Hannah, you said that they might give him a run for their money at home. But I just don't see it. I think Ryan Day has done something that Ohio State's been lacking for years and years and years, which is give them a killer attitude, the killer instinct of we're going in and we're dominating every game. We saw that against Wisconsin. We've seen that against even the lesser teams that they've played in their schedule. Ohio State's blowing everybody out every week. And in the past, Ohio State will do that and then have its bad trip-up loss. We haven't seen them struggle at all this year. I think Ryan Day, again, everyone talks about Tressman and everyone talks about Urban Meyer. Can we start talking about Ryan Day being the next great Ohio State coach? Because he has kept this team on message, totally focused. I think Michigan's going to have their hands full with Ohio State. I'm not going to call it yet. I want to see what happens as we go into that game. But I got to give Ohio State the heavy favorite at this point when you look at the way these two teams have played. One more comment here. Scott says, it sounds like a Michigan podcast on here with all those buts and maybes. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we talk about Harbaugh a lot, but when you have a guy that's been to the Super Bowl and you have a guy that's the third highest paid coach in college football behind Dabo Swinney and Nick Saban, it's pretty obvious, right, that we're going to talk about him and the results that he's had versus some of his peers. So we do talk about him a lot, but we're going to keep talking about him. I promise you. Every big game that they win and every big game we lose, we're like, what does this mean for Michigan and Jim Harbaugh? We'll move on. Let's talk about our next game. I actually do want to talk about that Ohio State win over Wisconsin really quickly, and then we'll go on to a couple more from last week, and we'll move on to next week's action. How good of a win is it against Wisconsin? Because, again, if they beat, Indiana the week before, we're talking about this team being highly rated. Ohio State totally runs them 38-7. Does the loss last week kind of devalue this win for Ohio State?
Yes and no. I mean, I think Ohio State is kind of at a point where they need every part of magic on their favor. And I say that because we've had this conversation before with Ohio State kind of being the team that everyone's like, when's it going to happen? Because historically, it's kind of like Gonzaga basketball. Historically, Ohio State does something to screw it up for themselves midway, maybe towards the end of the season. So you're looking at, the fact that they did, they've done well. And, I mean, Ohio State has such an easy schedule the next 2 weeks that I don't think they have anything to worry about. Now, when I say that, the next two games after that, the last few games going to be Penn State and Michigan. But if I'm looking at Ohio State and what they've done and who they played, I think they're considering everything because of how Ohio State's been in this position before. I mean, let's just be honest. If Ohio State loses one of these games, they're done. No doubt about it. If Ohio State wins out, they're in.
Do you think so? I don't know. I think they could lose to Penn State and then win the championship.
If they beat Penn State and Michigan, then they're in. I'm saying they have to win out. If they lose to Penn State, and let's just be honest for a minute. Let's just talk about Penn State because I think that's a team we're overlooking. They have to play Minnesota this weekend.
Sure.
Or next weekend. And that's going to be a big matchup because I think a lot of people are forgetting that Minnesota has done well at home. Yeah, they're ranked 13th. They've had some big wins. And they went on the road. They've kind of shaken up a little bit against Illinois. They beat Nebraska at home. Of course, they slung out the Rutgers, and they blew out Maryland. They're a team that I think people are forgetting that they're actually a really good team. So
here's why I think, because all these wins that they're putting up there are not blowouts. You watch Ohio State beat somebody like Wisconsin is 38-7. When Penn State wins, they play teams like Michigan and they play some other teams on their schedule. It's 20-14. It's 21-12. They are not blowing anyone out. They're winning these games, except for, I think it was Maryland that everyone was kind of picking the upset against them. They haven't really done a good job of just putting a ton of offense on the board. And does that mean you're a bad team? No, it does not. But I think, again, when you're talking about the college committee picking 4 teams to go to this college football playoff, and it should be more, and I'm going to talk about that when we come up to the end of the show, you have to look at the scores that they've put up. You have to look at the way they've played everybody. Penn State is a great team that's winning games close, as opposed to teams like Ohio State that are just blowing everyone out of the water. I think people are going to be willing to overlook a loss for Ohio State because they're putting up so many great results, whereas Penn State, I think, is kind of walking the knife's edge a little bit, where you can't afford to lose a game because every game you've played has been so close that the committee could say, well, they could have lost this one, they could have lost that one.
Well, I think one of the games that people are talking about that people aren't giving out the credit to is the Pitt game. Of course, they won 17-10, but Pitt done a good job. I mean, they beat UCF, they beat Duke, they beat Delaware barely, but they beat Syracuse. Yes, they lost to Miami. They should have won that game. There was a lot that happened, especially in the fourth quarter, that I kind of think should have gone towards in Pittsburgh's favor. But I mean, Pitt's a better team than I think people are taking respect.
But that's exactly my point. Pitt's not a ranked team, and it comes down to perception. I agree with you. Pitt is a good team, but it comes down to perception. When you're battling teams that are unranked and you're winning 17-10, it's going to come down to the committee's mind of, are they really the best team, and is this going to be the most entertaining product the NCAA can put out there in college when it comes time for the playoff? I think that's what plays against Penn State. And I think when you talk about Ohio State, every game you watch them, they're putting up offense. The defense is showing up. It's a complete win. As opposed to Penn State, where you're saying, yes, they're beating teams, and they're winning, and their record is great, but they're not doing it with style. The flair isn't there. And when you're only picking 4 teams, and the AP poll means nothing to this committee, are you going to go with the team that blew everybody out and has 1 loss? Or are you going to go with the team that scraped by literally every team that they've played, or close to every team that they've played? I do think the score matters. I think how you win is important to this committee as much as who you beat, and how many wins you have. So,
well, obviously, it is considering that's why they moved Clemson down under Alabama, even though they won against North Carolina. The win was not encouraging enough, or it didn't make them feel comfortable enough to say, you know what, they're a dominant number 1 team. That's when they moved down to number 2. So of course that does take into effect, but at the same time, you have to look at consistency. And I think that's something that people forget that happens in the college football playoff when they look at how a team is playing consistently. Yeah, this year's a little different than other ones with Ohio State, but when we've looked at Ohio State before, losing to an Iowa State, whoever they were losing to.
Purdue and everyone else.
Do what?
I said Purdue and everyone else. Yeah, I'm agreeing with you. I'm agreeing.
Well, what I'm saying is, those years that Ohio State lost a game, they weren't playing consistent games. Yeah, they would blow out a team 59-0, but then they would barely scrape by a team like Clemson did to North Carolina and win by 1 or 2 points. People are like, whoa, what happened? And then the next week they are close, and then the next week they lose. So I think we're talking about a completely different Ohio State team than we have before. But I'll say this: whoever wins the Penn State Ohio State matchup is going to have the best chance to get in the playoff. I don't think. Even if Penn State wins out, loses to Ohio State then. But if Penn State beats Ohio State and they win the rest of the games, we're looking at Penn State getting the playoff, not Ohio State.
I think it's got to be convincing, and we haven't seen that out of Penn State yet. If they win 13-12 and Ohio State has this great resume of just destroying everybody that comes in front of them, I think the committee might overlook that and say, well, Ohio State didn't quite win this, but they've beaten everybody. It just wasn't their day. And I think that's kind of what's playing against Penn State with where they're at. I think it's going to take a convincing win against Ohio State for me to say that the committee should pick them over Ohio State, the way they've played this year. And I'm one of the biggest Ohio State detractors. I up till now, I've said they haven't played tough schedules. They beat they beat a lot of bad teams and then wind up losing to one of them every year. This year, I can't say that. I think they played a tougher schedule. I think they've played much better week in and week out. It's consistency. I think that comes into it, and I think that's part of one of the flaws of only having 4 teams go into your playoff. Because let's face it, both of these teams should be in there, right? They're going to play each other. One's going to win. The other one's probably going to be out. But both of these teams realistically deserve to have their chance to play in the college football playoff. And that's not just them. You look at the SEC. You can say that about half the West. You look at the Pac-12. Oregon and Utah should be in there. You look at the Big 12. Baylor should get its chance. Oklahoma should get there. You can even look outside of the Power Fives and talk about SMU being undefeated and how good they've been, and UCF in the past. The moral of the story is we need more than 4 teams here, Hannah. It comes down to more than 4 teams, right? It should.
Well, I just think that, and let's just be honest. The problem is Alabama. And I say this because, and I've had numerous conversations. I actually had a really good interview with the man who was the head of the BCS committee, and he said Alabama ruined it for everyone. Because if you had an Alabama team who, and the reason they did, and the reason the BCS went away, was the 2011 national championship when LSU beat Alabama and Tuscaloosa in the regular season. Then Alabama comes to New Orleans. It beats, knocks out LSU for the national championship. That's kind of when the BCS became a flawed system for a team like Alabama. The problem is Alabama has every year in the college football playoffs made it to the playoff. There's not been a year that Alabama's not made it, and that even includes losing to Auburn losing to Georgia in the SEC championship, and both Georgia and Alabama face each other. So, I mean, it's just kind of, I think we're just seeing so many things happen each and every year. We're having conversations why Ohio State didn't get in, or why Penn State didn't get in, or even about Notre Dame not even being in a conference. So, are we going to expand the playoffs? Yeah, possibly. But I think you're going to see another year or two of them trying to make it okay with 4. And
I agree with that. Yeah.
I don't think they're going to jump to 8. I would probably say they'd go to 6 first.
I just don't. Their biggest complaint has been the strain on the athlete in college, saying that they don't want to have too many guys play too many games and everything. I don't think they go to 6 for the simple fact of that means that 2 teams at the top get a bye, and the other team has to play an extra game. I don't think they want to have teams going in where we are going to pick the 2 teams who don't have to play the extra game and get that advantage. I think it's got to be 8 or bust. I don't think 6 works in that kind of competitive system where all this is arbitrary, right? You can have undefeated teams going into the playoff, and then you have to pick which one is better. You don't want to decide that one undefeated team is better than the other because of who they played or anything else. I don't think 6 works. I think it's got to be 8. I get your point. I just think, again, there are 8 teams right now. Let me read you the top 8. LSU, Alabama, Ohio State, Clemson, Penn State, Florida, Oregon, Georgia. You got Utah on the outside looking in. You got Oklahoma on the outside looking in. You have Auburn and Baylor on the outside looking in. All those guys in the top 12. Reasonably, every one of those teams deserves a shot. That's not even counting SMU. That's not counting some of these other teams. Those teams deserve a shot because they're good enough that I think they could win on any given Saturday as opposed to any given Sunday. So
let's just be honest. Let's look through the top 10. I mean, okay, so the top 5 are undefeated, right? They're all 8-0. You have Florida and Oregon and Georgia. So Florida and Oregon 6 and 7. They're both 7-1. Georgia's 6-1. Utah 7-1. Oklahoma's 7-1. Auburn being 6-2 and ahead of Baylor, I don't agree with.
Well, I don't think Oklahoma should be ahead of those teams either. When you look at their loss versus Auburn losing to just tough opponents every week. I mean, they lost to LSU, the number 1 team in the nation, by 3 points.
Well, yeah,
and Oklahoma lost to Kansas State.
Well, you also lost to Florida. And the reason I'm saying this about Auburn is...
You lost to the number 6 team and you lost to the number 1 team.
Well, listen, let me finish. This Auburn team is not going to... They're not going to rebound from this. I mean, they have no depth in quarterback now. I mean, if Bo Nix goes down as a true freshman, the only other guy they have is going to be the true freshman. Joey Gatewood's done. Joey Gatewood has left the program, and that says a lot.
But you can't look at the depth and say they don't deserve to be better or to be ranked higher than Oklahoma is.
I'm saying they're not. I'm saying we're going to see an Auburn team who's going to lose another game, 2 games in my opinion.
More than likely. But right now they're behind Oklahoma, who just lost to unranked Kansas State.
They should. Baylor should be above them. I mean, you look at all the undefeated teams. I mean, Baylor's had a good run. Yeah, they're saying Baylor didn't play the same teams Auburn did, but I would have put Auburn at 13 or 14. I would have had Auburn above Michigan, but I wouldn't have had them above Minnesota and Baylor undefeated teams. I've never agreed with that. Even if
I would, and here's why. Let me say this: Auburn went out of their way to play Oregon, the 7th-rated team, in the first week of the college football season, and they beat them heads up. And again, this isn't a negative against Oregon. That was a tough game that neither one of those teams had to play. Instead, they said, we want to have a tough schedule. We want to schedule this in order to make our schedule tougher. Oklahoma's playing Kansas State right now. They don't have a tough schedule, and they just lost to an unranked team that, again, reasonably, they were a 20-some point favorite, Hannah. There's no reason Oklahoma's rated ahead of them. There's no reason they're rated ahead of Baylor. There's no reason Michigan, who has bad losses and struggled against teams like Army and let teams like MTSU hang around, should be going up against Auburn, who, yes, they have 2 losses, but they lost to number 6 and they lost to number 1, and to number 1 it was by 3 points. To number 6 it was by 9. We're talking about a team that has played the best of the best, has had one of the toughest schedules in college football, and they're behind teams who have played nobodies and lost to some of them. I don't agree with that. My other point here is every one of those teams reasonably should have a shot here. So good to see you, Ian. I'm glad you stopped in and said hi to us. There's the top 8 teams in college football reasonably have a chance to win on any given Sunday. I don't care if they're playing Alabama or LSU or Clemson or Penn State. Teams like Oregon, teams like Georgia, teams like Utah can have a good day against them. That's why I'm saying that we need a deeper playoff than just 4, because it becomes too arbitrary on who gets in and who doesn't when it comes to who's got the tougher schedule, who's won out. Because, Baylor has won out. They're 7-0. But you can't tell me Baylor has played anywhere near the opponents that Auburn has, which is why I have to say that they're ahead of them. I don't care that they're 7-0. If you go and beat teams who are worse than you, you don't deserve to be ahead of the guys that have ventured out and played teams like Oregon and played teams like LSU and Florida, and they're going to have Alabama coming up. It's not the same. And that, I think, is always the biggest problem with college football for me, is you don't have definitive answers. It comes down to who do we think that we like that or should be in the college football playoff. You can solve that by expanding the playoff to more than 4 teams. I'm done. Rant's over. Sorry.
No, go ahead. You're good.
No, the rant's over. That's it.
Well, I think it's just going to take time. I don't think it's a conversation obviously needs to happen today, because it's going to take quite a while for them to kind of get a consistent system. That's why I think we'll see in maybe a year or 2 we're having a conversation when they're going to up the playoff. But, right now they're making money, and that's all the committee's really worried about, to be honest anyway. It's just making money and putting the right teams in. That's all they're focused on. And you look at how much they're making every year, they're not worried about it.
Well, sure, but will they make more money with 8 teams as opposed to 4 in the playoff? And the answer to that is
yes, but
yes.
No. It's gonna change a lot. I've had legit conversations with people who are on the college football playoff committee, and it's gonna change a lot of the game.
But change is good. Change is not always bad.
The championship games, there's gonna be a lot happen within the scheduling of these programs that it's going to take an effect. You're going to have teams, I think, going to get injured more because, when I've had a conversation with one of the guys in the playoff committee, he was like, listen, you're going to take away 2 cupcake teams. You're going to have your regular season games. You'll lose your last cupcake game. You'll move the Iron Bowl up 1 week. Then you're going to have the Iron Bowl, and then you'll have 1 week off, and then it's going to be the championship.
Why do you have to add? Why can you not just stretch out the college football season another week or 2? And yes, you're putting a little bit more. You are putting more strain on those guys. I'll give you that. You're putting a little bit more strain on them. But this is also the chance for them to go out and prove that, hey, it's an extra chance to go out and prove that, hey, I deserve my top level draft pick, because if you're playing for one of these top 8 teams, odds are you're in the running for an NFL draft pick. You may not even be the best guy in the field, but you have the chance to get looked at. This is another audition for them. Yes, there's always the risk of injury. You could even stretch it out by 2 or 3 weeks and put a bye week, kind of like pro football used to do with the Pro Bowl, in between your championship game and the round before that. I think this is something. I think there's more creative answers to this. I just think that college football is a super conservative organization that's afraid of change and is afraid to mix things up, and we've seen that happen over and over and over again. How long did it take them to go to 4 teams? It was always just, we're going to pick the top 2 teams that we like, and they're going to play against each other, and that's your national champion.
Yep.
So, again, there are creative answers to this. I think, is it fair necessarily to the players? Not that they're going to play more games than others, but if you're reasonably going to go on to make millions of dollars, don't you want the extra chance to prove yourself?
Yeah.
I know I do.
We should move on, though, because we got comments. And
we do. Scott says, take the top 8 teams and be done with it. If you don't handle your business, too bad. I'm with you there. I think it at least needs to be 8. Much beyond that, you can say they don't deserve it, but 8 teams reasonably could win the college football playoff. But even if you have 8, there'll still be people saying we're ranked, or we're number 9, or we're number 10. We deserve our shot. Yada yada. So there'll never be a perfect answer unless you put 128 teams in the FBS in there. We'll move on. We'll talk about this next game. Oklahoma losing to Kansas State. Again, huge loss. We kind of touched on it already. Any final thoughts about this, Hannah?
No, we're good.
All right. Any thoughts about Auburn and LSU?
It was a good game. I think people kind of underestimated LSU. I think they're a team that I said in the beginning of the year, they're a team you have to watch out for. I did say that there's one team I think had the chance to beat Alabama, and it is LSU. I think LSU's a great team. I think Ed Orgeron's done a fantastic job with them, completely turning a program around, a program that a couple of years ago was dead in the dumps, now tied for first with Alabama in the West. That's why this game's going to be so big against Alabama. But, it's the number 1 and number 2 showdown. historically, Alabama LSU matchups are huge, and I think no doubt after watching Auburn lose in Baton Rouge to LSU was the big game. I mean, LSU had to do what they had to do. I mean, they were scoreless in their first quarter, came back second and third quarter. Both teams scored a touchdown on the fourth. But, I mean, Joe Burrow's done a fantastic job. Yes, he threw an interception on Saturday, but he's been the guy who has been stability for his team. I mean, during for 321 yards, going 32 of 42, kind of showed what he's capable of. And I think, honestly, you look at the rushing game for them, I was impressed. I mean, I think LSU is a good team. Do I think Auburn had a good game? Yeah. But at the same time, Bo Nix has not been that good quarterback. I mean, he missed 20 of his passes last week, going 15 to 35 for only 157 yards. So I think there's just a lot of drama. I think that, in my opinion, Gus Malzahn shot himself in the foot. I think when you looked at a Bo Nix kind of not creating any momentum for his team, you bring in a guy like Joey Gatewood. We saw a clip, I don't know if you've seen it on Twitter, going viral of Joey Gatewood getting pulled back out of the game by Gus Malzahn, even though his number was called by the offensive coordinator, because Gus Malzahn was like, no, let Bo play.
Right.
And obviously that drive went dead. So, I mean, when I think about it, I think it showed LSU's capable of winning. I think it showed Auburn's capable of putting up a fight. But at this point in the season, with the injuries they have and the way they played, I've not been impressed. I'll say this honestly. I've been very under-impressed with Bo Nix this year. I think he had too much hype around him, and that's historical. That's not even against him. That's historical for Auburn quarterbacks because Gus Malzahn hypes him up to be the next Cam Newton, and it always crashes and burns. I mean, Jarrett Stidham was a guy who, even in his first year, kind of probably underperformed. He got better every game. But, I mean, historically, Auburn has struggled in the quarterback position consistently, and I think this is another year where if Bo Nix would have been a sophomore or junior with more experience, I think both the games they lost, both LSU and Florida, could have been wins in Auburn's favor.
Could it be also a skill position kind of question where, yes, we'll see good running backs come out of Auburn, but we don't exactly see Gus Malzahn's system utilize his wide receivers enough? Could he have enough weapons? I mean, I know we're piling on Bo Nix, but it could just be the fact that he went up against a great LSU defense, and they still put 20 points on the board. A 3-point loss, I get it. It wasn't a dominant performance by Bo Nix in this game, but it was a 3-point loss to a great team like LSU. I can't take too much away from him because we know how good LSU is on defense. This is the fact that they were in it with a true freshman quarterback going out into a place like LSU. To me, this is a great. This is not necessarily a bad performance. I don't want to say it's a great performance, but you're asking a true freshman, an 18-year-old, to come in there and match up against the best team in the nation, or now the best team in the nation because they won this game. Hannah, I think sometimes we got to look at it and say he did what he could. I don't think it was a bad result for him. I know they lost, but by 3.
Well, I'll say this. I mean, I'm kind of get tired of people using the whole true freshman. I don't care if you're a true freshman or senior coming in.
Well, I do. I definitely do, because the difference between 18 going against LSU versus I'm 22 and have played, I think it matters. I do.
All right, let me finish. Auburn has struggled this year. Even going to Texas A&M, Bo Nix only threw for 100 yards, right? 12 to 20, 100 yards. Are they running the ball okay? Yeah, I mean, Jarvis Whitlow's done great. Anthony Schwartz has tried to move the ball a little bit. But the receivers, when you have a guy like Eli Stove and Seth Williams getting less than 50 yards in a game on 4 receptions, that's a problem. I mean, it's not just that. I mean, let's look at Mississippi State again. They blew them out of home, right? He's able to throw 16, 21, 335 yards, but even the receivers. I mean, Seth Williams getting 161 yards, but you still have guys who last year and 2 years ago were getting 100-plus yard receiving games a game. Now Eli Stove's getting 1 reception, 27 yards. And Will Hastings, the guy who was clutch for Jerry Stidham numerous games in a row, I think it's the calling offense corner. I'm not putting it all on Bo Nix. I think there were some horrible passes on his part where I'll say this. I think that's when his inexperience comes in. It's kind of like what Blake Sims used to do with Alabama. And even Jalen Hurts. They were only able to read 1 or 2 receivers. They can't read past that. That's just something that has to develop over time. When you have a quarterback come in like Joe Burrow at a young age and say, you know what, I'm going to call an audible here. Or you know what, I have no receivers. I'm not going to throw them and see what I can do with a quick slant pass. And I think we're seeing Bo Nix, who tries to make something out of nothing, and that costs his team, whether it's interception or, going from second and 10 to third and 10 and being one of the worst teams with a third down, possessions. So, I mean, I think it's with the offensive coordinator, and not Gus Malzahn's fault, because he has run away every offensive coordinator that has been there under his tenure because he's a control freak. Gus Malzahn has to control the game. That's just what he's done. He's done it with Brett Lashley. He's done it with so many of his offensive coordinators. So, I mean, I think it's just a learning curve for Auburn. I think it's unfortunate because Auburn has a great defense. That's why we see them put up good numbers and stop LSU and stop Florida. Is they have a great defense. It's just unfortunate that their offense is so young and that the play calling's so skewed, because if not, I think we're seeing Auburn win those two games and Auburn being a team in the top 5.
All right, let's talk about games this week. Let's talk about SMU versus Memphis. Again, one of our few ranked matchups of the week. Does SMU kind of have that UCF bid if they win this game here, Hannah, that we are a team that is not necessarily in a Power 5 conference, but should be considered for the playoff, even though we don't play the same kind of level of competition that some of these other guys do?
I'm going to have to see what SMU is capable of doing for this game. And the reason I say this is because they put up good numbers against the teams they played so far, including TCU and South Florida. But, I mean, Memphis is a good team. And that's going to be the only ranked team that we've seen SMU match all year. I mean, Houston, who right now is a 3-5 team, almost beat SMU at home. And so if I'm Memphis, I think Memphis has a really good chance to win this. I'm actually picking Memphis to beat SMU.
Well, they are the favorite. They're at -6 right now. Do you give them a 6-point spread?
Well, yeah. I mean, maybe 3. But Memphis has had a good team.
So Memphis will win but won't cover.
Well, it depends. I mean, they've done a good job covering this year, but all their games have been close. So definitely 6. I would just say 3. I wouldn't be surprised if this game was won on a field goal.
I actually think SMU is going to win it. To go the opposite direction, I think Memphis' offense has not been as explosive as it has been in years past. I also think when you look at SMU, they just had magic this season. They've always found a way to get the job done. I think they're going to win this game, and we're going to be having our next lower or non-Power 5 conference team coming in saying, I deserve to be in the playoff conversation, even though I don't. I don't think SMU is a good enough team to be in there, but I think it's going to keep things alive. I think Memphis, even though they're that 6-point favorite at home, I think they're going to lose this one outright, and I'm going to take SMU in this one.
All right, which one do you want to cover next?
Let's talk about Utah and Washington, a team that, again, still not an easy win when you look at the Pac-12, but this game is incredibly important when you talk about them trying to run down Oregon 2 spots ahead of them. Utah has been absolutely fantastic. Their defense is number 1 in both total defense and scoring defense now this year. I think we're underrating how good this Utah team has been since week 1 because, again, they play in the Pac-12 and the schedule's not as sexy as if you play in the Big Ten or if you play in the SEC. Does Utah cover in this one? Because they are a 3.5-point favorite here, even on the road.
Yeah, I mean, I think they do. I think they've been playing consistent football. I mean, beating Cal 35-0 was a good test in it. Of course, beating Arizona State. They've done good on the road. They destroyed Oregon State on the road. They've done a good job, of course, when they've had close games, including at BYU earlier. But their loss, of course, to USC, I think, kind of put Utah in the bubble in the question. I think if Utah would have won that game at USC, we're looking at a Utah who probably in the 6-7 spot. With playoff contention more so than now, they have to win this game. I think Washington wins. I think Utah wins this game. I think they do cover the spread. I think Washington has just struggled consistently. Of course, losing to Oregon was a close game, but still lost to Oregon. And then losing to Stanford 2 weeks before that, I think was kind of the dagger in Washington's swagger. I think that they're a different Washington team than we said before. I don't think they're as dominant in the Pac-12 as they have been. I think Utah is kind of the team that we knew coming out of this. And I think, honestly, Utah has the chance to go undefeated the rest of the year, losing one game. We're looking at a team who easily the favorite in the Pac-12.
Let's talk about our last game, Georgia and Florida matching up against each other. We already talked about it a little bit before, saying this is the premier matchup. 2 teams enter, 1 team leaves. Who you got in this one, Hannah? Georgia is a 6-point favorite here at home against Florida.
I'm going to go Florida. It's just a gut feeling. Can't really explain it, but I think the fact that you have a guy like Dan Mullen who honestly has done a fantastic job with the quarterback situation there at Florida. I mean, he's been doing a lot. And I think this is the first year where we've seen Florida be a team that we haven't really seen in a long time since Urban Meyer was at Florida. I mean, Jim McElwain couldn't get this going. I mean, there have been plenty of Florida coaches who have just kind of struggled, and I think Dan Mullen's kind of been that guy to come in and revamp a program. I think Florida's on the roll right now. Do I think they're going to cover? If it was to be opposite, no. I think it's going to be a close game. But I think since it's at Florida, that just helps a lot. But even so, Georgia's just not been the same Georgia team. I said that weeks ago, that Georgia's not been the same team they haven't been. And there's a reason they lost to South Carolina at home. And so I'm definitely picking Georgia. I'm definitely picking Florida. But I think it's going to be a good game. I don't think it's going to be a blowout. I think it's going to be a closer game. I don't think they cover the spread. But I'm going to have to go with Florida on this one.
I'm with you. I think Florida wins here. And I think this is going to be a game that even on the road, Florida kind of establishes itself as the new leader in the East for the SEC. Both teams have kind of struggled a little bit on offense these past couple weeks, but both of them with bye weeks to prepare for it. My question is, do we get the old Jake Fromm back? And that's who I think Georgia's going to need to win this game. My answer is probably not. I think Jake Fromm is playing for his pro career. If he wants to be a first-round pick like everyone kind of predicts him to, he's got to have a good game here. I just don't think it happens. I think Florida wins this one, and I think it's close. I'm with you there. I think it's like a 2 or 3 point victory, but you don't have to worry about the spread when you're the underdog, right? If you win outright, I think Florida is going to be the team to beat. So definitely the game to watch. Any final thoughts before we get out of here, Hannah?
No, I think let's just say Alabama beat LSU in 2 weeks, and we're seeing Alabama, Florida. I will say this. It's going to be a much interesting and much more intriguing matchup than we have seen with Jim McElwain back to the SEC Championship. I think this is the Florida team who should potentially beat Alabama. Do they? I don't think so. But I think it's probably one of the best Florida teams we've seen in a long time, so it does intrigue me. But there's a lot of good matchups, and I think this week in college football is kind of people are kind of bummed that there's a week between Alabama and LSU, but there's still tons of good games to watch. And this game determines the East, like next week determines the West. So if you're an SEC fan, definitely tune in because there's a lot of good games going on.
Absolutely. All right, guys, thank you so much for watching. It was a fun show. I know I had a good time. A lot to talk about, a lot to chew over. Even though this week doesn't have quite as much action going on for it, there's always something to talk about in the NCAA. Now it's, should they pay players? Should they allow them to make money on their own? It was a great show, Hannah. I appreciate you joining us. Guys, we will be back on Friday to talk about the NFL and the week coming up for that. We hope you're there for that preview. So for Sports Around the Bar, I am Jake, this is Hannah, and we will see you guys on Friday.
See y'all.